Hey, it's Coach Ashley here again from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online, U.S. history from 1877 to present. Once again, we're still in Unit 8, the Great Depression, and what we're trying to do today is talk about Lesson 4. And Lesson 4 is Hoover's American Individualism. Now, it's important to understand that before we even go any further, to understand that Hoover was a Republican, and Republicans, in terms of their ideas of government, were a little bit different, of course, than that of Democrats. And we'll dive into that in just a few moments. What we want you to do, of course, is you to look at the unit focus question that we always give you. And the unit focus question, of course, is identify the causes and immediate effects of the Great Depression on the United States of America. Matter of fact, we've done enough work so far that you probably can answer that question already. But if not, what we'll do, of course, is hold on and we will answer it at the end of the unit. Vocabulary that we have today, we have academic vocabulary and content vocabulary. Once again, what we do is encourage you, of course, to define those words yourself. But we'll try to address some of them, of course, as we come up and we see them, of course, in the lesson. Today, our lesson focus questions is what was President Hoover's response to the Great Depression? This is a question, of course, that we will answer and address, of course, at the end of the lesson. And our journal topic, of course, are do now activities. So take out your journals, write down, imagine you wake up losing all your savings and your home and you have no job or job prospects. Does the federal government bear any responsibility in helping you get back on your feet? What we'll do, of course, is give you a few minutes, of course, to look over that and ponder that particular question. And then, of course, create your answer. Okay, you should have plenty of enough time, of course, to go through and answer the do now activity, of course, with the journal topic. And once again, it says, imagine you wake up losing all your savings in your home and you have no job or no job prospects. Does the federal government bear any responsibility in helping you get back on your feet? A lot of people today would probably say, yes, it does bear some responsibility. But that's not what people, of course, were used to in the 1920s and the 1930s, especially when it came to the idea of the government, of course, interfering or intervening in people's everyday affairs. So when you look at the government, you have to also understand that who Herbert Hoover was. He was a Republican that believed in laissez-faire, and he believed in rugged individualism. And what rugged individualism, in his case called American individualism, what it meant was that everybody should be equipped to stand on their own 2 feet. So what we'll do, of course, is dive into Hoover, and we'll talk about Hoover's response to the Great Depression. Now, he's the president of the United States of America, so what we want to be thinking about is, does he bear any kind of responsibility in helping the American people? Hoover believed in American individualism, which was akin. Akin means like to social Darwinism. He believed that the economic issue facing the nation would work itself out without government intervention. As a result, he did very little to provide relief to American individuals, but did provide some limited help to American businesses. And he only did that reluctantly. American prosperity had been built on 2 Republican principles, laissez-faire and rugged individualism, and Hoover was very reluctant to do anything, of course, that went counterintuitive to those beliefs. Limited help to businesses and banks. Now, he did provide some help, of course, to some of the businesses and banks because he recognized that in order for people, of course, to get jobs, get back on their feet, they had to have jobs. And the only way that people, of course, can get jobs, of course, if banks and businesses, of course, were able to loan money, and in the case of businesses, able to hire people. Hoover did create some public work projects to create jobs, and those work projects were limited because the government couldn't fund them without raising taxes or borrowing money. 2 things, once again, that Republicans like Hoover kind of rejected: the idea of having to borrow money or deficit spend. Deficit spending is where you borrow money against some idea of repaying it later. Hoover rejected the idea of direct relief to citizens. He didn't believe that you should give a person a fish if they were starving. He said he would be more along the lines of you teach them to fish. So in the case of giving relief, direct relief, or giving money to individuals, that's not something, of course, that Hoover, prescribed or ascribed to. Hoover did create the Reconstruction Finance Corporation to give loans to businesses, banks, railroads, and keep them afloat and keep people, of course, working. Now, when you look at that Reconstruction Finance Corporation, it's going to become a staple in American government for a little while, because in the 1940s, when the United States of America gets involved in World War II, it's going to have a role to play. Hoover's unpopularity grows. The only thing about being, president during one of the worst times, of course, in American history, you get the blame for everything. Looting and riots occurred in 1931 as people turned to violence to feed their families. Hunger marches were organized by the American Communist Party. Penny auctions were used to fight farm foreclosures. Many believe that Hoover's actions were to benefit the rich, and policies didn't trickle down to the poor. Trickle down meaning it's an idea of economics, that if the people and the wealthy who are the business owners are doing well, some of that wealth, of course, will trickle down, of course, to, or that prosperity will trickle down to the people, of course, that works for them. So if I, as a business owner, do well, then the people that work for me, in turn, will do well also. Let's go back to that term, penny auction. A lot of people, of course, were losing their homes to bank foreclosures. And what would happen, of course, is the bank, in order to get some of its money, that it had tied up in people's places, it would put those, it would take control of those places, of course, and put them up for auctions. It was kind of ingenious what they would do, though. Some of the farmers would get together, and what they would do when they have the auction, they all would get together to agree that they would only bid to a certain amount, allowing the person who lost their property to bid on the property, of course, and get it back. That's American ingenuity right there. The Bonus Army. World War I veterans marched on Washington in May of 1932 in search of pensions that they were promised to them by the federal government. And the government did tell these veterans of World War I that they were going to get a pension, but it was going to be in the 1940s. They wanted it early. And they march on Washington, they camp out, start Hoovervilles outside of Washington, and Hoover, after letting them stay there for a little while, decided it was time for them to go. So he sends in one of the most decorated generals in the history of the United States of America. He ain't decorated at that time, but General Douglas MacArthur is sent in, of course, to run them out. So Hoover's failure to address direct relief tarnished his reputation and resulted in him losing the election of 1932. There's some pictures of the bonus armies. There's them on the grounds, of course, sleeping on the grounds outside the Capitol, and then it's Camp Anacostia in Washington, D.C. Here's a picture of General Douglas MacArthur, who becomes one of the most celebrated generals in the history of the United States of America during World War II. Specifically, of course, in making the I shall return speech, of course, after the Battle of Leyte Gulf, and then the returning to Leyte Gulf and defeating, of course, the Japanese. Here what we have, of course, is another worksheet for you to do, of course, to kind of summarize all the things, of course, that we talked about in this particular lesson. What we're going to do, of course, is these are the causes of the Great Depression. We're going to give you a few minutes, of course, to go through and complete this particular worksheet. And then once you finish, we'll come right back and we'll talk about what some of those answers, of course, could be. Okay, you should have had enough time that you were able, of course, to go through and look at the causes of the Great Depression and looking at some of the answers that we got, of course. One would be D, poor farming practices lead to the Dust Bowl. A, the stock market crash, the crash that led to the massive decline in stock prices, causing many investors to lose their savings. And once again, if you paid attention, of course, as we were going over these things, you shouldn't have had a great deal of difficulty, of course, to kind of figure out what some of these answers are. What we have next for, of course, is the lesson focus question. And the lesson focus question says, what was President Hoover's response to the Great Depression? Well, we told you that Hoover, of course, was a Republican. And because he was a Republican, he didn't ascribe to the belief that direct relief should be given to the public or to citizens. What he did believe in was this. He believed that primarily what he should do, of course, is do nothing. Let the Depression run its course. He believed in this idea of rugged individualism, or in his case, American individualism. When that failed, he did provide some aid to banks, railroads, and businesses. And at the heart of his plan was to have businesses' success trickle down to workers. And as we said, that trickle down, of course, effect did not work. Here we have, of course, the end of lesson 4. And once again, this is Coach Anderson from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online, U.S. History from 1877 to present. And once again, as I always tell you, don't take my word for it. Do your own research, draw your own conclusions, and we'll see you next time.